Video game character redesigns. Often controversial, often awesome. Sometimes they work out well, other times, not so much. Hey, it's Loxton, and today I'm going to be covering 10 serious video game character redesigns. And the best way to get across what I mean is to explain by example. So let's get started. Oh, and by the way, links to all of these games can be found on my Games Grabber page. Games Grabber is a website where you can manage various video game collections, be them games you have or games you want. It even saves links for you to go to so you can buy them later on. You should check it out, it's cool, and you can give me a follow on there. First, let's talk about one of the redesigns that's on the thumbnail of this video. Tomb Raider. Lara Croft. The first two trilogies of Tomb Raider had a slight redesign, but I'd say they are more just products of their graphical limitations. Originally, Lara was a well-trained killer, and, well, a Tomb Raider. She had no problem with acrobatics and shooting you or anything else in the face. Though she was also quite famous for just the size of her arsenal of weapons, dual pistols and all. Oh, and her bust. Her bust too. As well as her well-toned body. Polygons.
Don't you think you've seen enough?
She was often called out for being too sexy. Sexist even. Unrealistic. So, come the well-timed reboot of the series, giving her a much more realistic body. Basically, as in, her boobs aren't bigger than her head anymore. And she was given emotions. Who would have thought? This made the game more cinematic and a lot more serious. Or at least the game tried to have the audience take her more seriously anyway. Rather than just being an awesome renegade, she was human. This reboot explores her origin story. She starts off sad and desperate at all these things that are happening to her, but it ends with her as a stronger and much more serious woman. But as with any redesign, not everyone was happy. Many people claimed that this deeper emotional spectrum that she had, as in, you know, is a normal human level of emotions instead of a teaspoon. Many claimed that this was even further sexism. Overall though, as far as just her physical design goes, I'd say this change was a good one. The clothing is much more realistic for an archaeologist to have, as opposed to a super awesome renegade, crazy secret agent, hero, spy lady that shoots stuff in the face. She's not the Tomb Raider yet, but she's getting there. And that, I think, is what the design's trying to get across. And it does a fantastic job with it. Spyro the Dragon. Spyro started off as a must-have PlayStation trilogy. He was an adorable young dragon with that classic 90s attitude. He was cool. The design showed off his youth and his horny attitude. I mean horny as in he has horns, and he attacks with them. Because he has attitude, he's gonna attack. I'm awesome, I'm Spyro. The Legend of Spyro trilogy gave his design some improvements and some detriments according to some. He's definitely matured and his design reflects that, and he takes himself much more seriously, but he still has that awesome attitude. He looks more like your classic fantasy dragon now, rather than a toon, which is a way of him growing up with his audience, and I think this actually works pretty well. Not perfectly, but very well done. As for Skylander's Spyro, that was just my initial reaction. He's definitely grown on me. He looks like a pug mixed with a dragon. He's a pagan. Honestly speaking, Skylanders doesn't need to be a Spyro game. In fact, if you were to take this design of a dragon and name it something other than Spyro, people would probably like it a lot more. Personally, I still prefer the Legends design of Spyro, but the Skylanders one has definitely grown on me. He's cuter, which reflects what they were going for with Skylanders. But Dante from Devil May Cry, on the other hand, this is one of the most controversial redesigns in gaming history, and I'll definitely be covering it more in depth with a video later on. But basically, Capcom wanted Devil May Cry to appeal to a wider audience, specifically in the West, but in the process they isolated their old fans. Old Dante was awesome, and personality-wise, knew his whole life was a joke. He loved fighting demons. He really got into his life, and his simple yet, dare I say, badass design reflected that. Enter New Dante, who took things way too seriously. He was given a more hip and edgy punk-looking look, and his personality was altered to reflect this attire, and for the worse. Significantly. He lost what the old fans loved about him. And not only did Capcom do all this, but they also insulted his old look in the game. Take a look at this scene.
Not in a million years.
That's basically a slap in the face to old DMC fans. Now we'll look at Rad Spencer. Yes, his name is Rad Spencer. If you are unaware, he is from the NES classic Bionic Commando, which had a pretty rad remake on PSN. But then came a reimagining of Rad Spencer in the 2009 game Bionic Commando. This new game was okay. Still good enough for me to have fun and finish it, but I wouldn't particularly recommend it to anyone. His new design and attitude, though... No longer was he the totally rad dude with a totally rad mustache. Now, he was Dreadlock McSeriousson, and fans were not happy. And the terrible voice acting didn't help the game's case either. Bionic Commando tried taking itself too seriously. Prince of Persia went through a few redesigns. Prince of Persia Sands of Time reintroduced the prince as a fun, combat-loving prince of pure courage. He had his serious moments, but they were far and few between. The combat reflected his fun-loving side, as did the more cartoony art style, and fans loved this. But then, his next redesign would come with the sequel, Warrior Within, and the prince did not fare well. Now taking himself too seriously in a dark and gritty Arabian land, his design reflects the same negative changes we've been seeing a lot of in this video. His dark, edgy, and serious sides would become his sole personality, and Ubisoft would keep this design for the third entrance into the trilogy, Two Thrones, except they made him even darker. Your classic edgy McGee situation. I guess they never learned, and the even more recent redesign kinda fell through the same holes. And now for the worst offender of this too serious theme. Bomberman. Look at this character! He is adorable! Though he'd never make it through an airport. Bomberman is a cute, fun-loving party game with character stylization to back it up. And then the time came to try and give Bomberman a wider appeal to the American audience. And the result was Bomberman Act Zero, where you play as cyborg terrorists trying to get out from the underground. How in the world do you go from this to this while keeping the same basic gameplay? Very poorly. That is the answer to that question. With all these redesigns of characters trying to take themselves too seriously, you might assume that that must be a bad thing always. But I say Jak and Daxter prove that wrong. Starting off as a childish platforming collectathon, their design reflects that. They are fun, cartoony, and cheery, and come the sequel, they are flung into the future, and Jak gets a taste of reality. It's dark, and he gets some edge thrown into his design, but not too much. Then come Jak 3, he has grown up even more, and his use of weapons has changed him. While their designs have become more dark and serious, even edgy, not too much of that was added in. They still had their fun side intact. Really what happened with them is they grew up with their audience, which is awesome. This is how you do a more serious design right. And now, well, we couldn't really be in the doing serious right category for too long, now could we? I now introduce to you Simon Belmont. Castlevania was awesome, and you were this awesome vampire hunter with an awesome whip. It was rad. Looking at Simon's initial design, it is very Conan the Barbarian inspired, which makes sense for the time. It was the 80s after all. Though admittedly, if a new character was to be designed like this, it would strike you as odd. That's not particularly a design that screams modern popular character. It wasn't the 80s though, like, he was super popular. But now comes Castlevania Judgment on the Wii, a Castlevania fighting game that pulls Castlevania characters from the whole Castlevania franchise and pits them against one another. Though, as I said, Simon's design would be odd for the modern age, so it would make sense to redesign him, to update him. But then they did this. Is this supposed to be serious? It can't be. I mean, he looks like a J-pop Death Note character. Maybe that's what they were going for, actually. If it was, then boy, they totally succeeded. But still, they took a classic, silently awesome vampire and monster killer that fit the times he was based in, and made him Japanese emo goth metal band member number 665. Sonic the Hedgehog has gone through 2 major redesigns, and these designs do a good job of reflecting the times. Initially, he was a cute, fast hedgehog, but with that classic 90s attitude. He was too cool for school and ran really fast. As the times went on, though, his appeal began to weaken. He needed an update. What had become cool and hip had changed. So, it would make sense to redesign him like this. He's still really cool, he's still really fast, and he fits the early aughts. He's longer, bluer, faster, and hedgehoggier. He kept his old attitude and added to it. The whole franchise was trying to get you to take Sonic and his friends more seriously than just a fun cartoon hedgehog character. And it pretty much worked. Except for Charmy. Charmy will never be taken seriously. But what about his most recent redesign, that of Sonic Boom? Taking the terrible, terrible game mechanics of that game aside and looking exclusively at his design, they made Sonic even longer, giving him a more teenager feel, which I think adds to his overall appeal, as in our modern day the cool teenager look is looked up upon by youths. And while they kept some of his attitude intact, I feel like he's a lot more cartoony now, so they toned the seriousness down a bit, kind of like a self-parody. But still, that middle phase of Sonic with the introduction of Sonic swearing,
Damn, they got away!
and forming a relationship with a human, not to mention the more realistic and darker tone of the whole game. And sure enough, Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic 06, the 2 games that tried to make Sonic the most serious, are also seen as some of the worst Sonic games ever created. And we will end with Link from The Legend of Zelda. Now, Link goes through quite a number of redesigns throughout the whole franchise, but he always keeps his classic look, the green tunic and the fancy green hat. But now, it's hard to disagree with this statement. Wind Waker Link is the most drastic change in Link. Because I mean, before Wind Waker we had Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, both of which were on the more realistic side of the Zelda franchise. You know, for what the N64 could handle. And even in a tech demo to show what a Legend of Zelda game would look like on the GameCube, Nintendo showed off a much more realistic looking Link, fighting a much more realistic looking Ganondorf. And then they released Wind Waker, years later. This is not realistic, this is not serious. Lots of people didn't like it. People were in flame wars. Many loved it, many hated it. But unlike many of the other designs I've mentioned that spawned hate among fans, the hate for Wind Waker would not last. And I'll get right back to that in a second. But after all of this backlash for Zelda becoming too cartoony, the next Zelda game was Twilight Princess, which is to this day still one of the darkest, most serious, brownest, bloomiest Zelda games ever. It was awesome! But would it stand the test of time? As the years went by and more people got over themselves and played Wind Waker despite its kiddie graphics, many people hold it up as an amazing game. One of the best Zelda games. And even if you ignore the amazing HD remake, GameCube Wind Waker today still looks way better artistically than Twilight Princess ever did. And now, Toon Link is a beloved iteration of Link. His expressiveness sets him apart from the others, and this design has become the standard way for the more toony Zeldas to depict Link in the future. And after Twilight Princess, Nintendo chose a more middle ground with Skyward Sword. More realistic-ish, but also more cartoony than Twilight Princess. And now with Zelda U, they're leaning even more towards the Wind Waker feel, because Wind Waker did indeed pass the test of time. Making a game more serious, like going from Wind Waker to Twilight Princess, doesn't always work. It doesn't always give the game the wider appeal that they're hoping for. People love fun-loving characters. People love expressive characters, especially kids when they're your target audience. There's nothing wrong with serious characters. In fact, many serious games are among fan favorites. But taking a fun-loving character and changing them into a serious character just puts them in the giant, brown, bloomy cloud that is generic gaming. Plus, redesigning and changing a character often hurts fans' feelings, because change is never loved on the internet. For one. I mean, that's something you have to consider. But really now, change can work well. Change can be amazing. Making a character more serious can work out fantastically. It's just more often than not it doesn't. So what do you think? What are some redesign choices that you particularly enjoy, and that you particularly hate? Was it turning a fun character more serious, or taking a semi-serious character and making them edgy McEggerson? Let me know down below, and never stop using that noggin. Oh, and by the way, links to all of these games can be found on my Games Grabber page. Games Grabber is a website where you can manage various video game collections, be them games you have or games you want. It even saves links for you to go to so you can buy them later on. You should check it out, it's cool, and you can give me a follow on there. First, let's talk about one of the redesigns that's on the thumbnail of this video. Tomb Raider, Lara Croft. Video game character redesigns. Often controversial, often awesome. Sometimes they work out well, other times not so much. Hey, it's Loxton, and today I'm going to be covering 10 serious video game character redesigns. And the best way to get across what I mean is to explain by example. So let's get started. I thought this made the game more cinematic and a lot more serious. Or at least the game tried to have the audience take her more seriously anyway. Rather than just being an awesome renegade, she was human. This reboot explores her origin story. She starts off sad and desperate at all these things that are happening to her, but it ends with her as a stronger and much more serious woman. The first two trilogies of Tomb Raider had a slight redesign, but I'd say they are more just products of their graphical limitations. Originally, Lara was a well-trained killer and, well, a Tomb Raider. She had no problem with acrobatics and shooting you or anything else in the face. Though she was also quite famous for just the size of her arsenal of weapons, dual pistols and all. Oh, and her bust. Her bust too. As well as her well-toned body. Polygons.
Don't you think you've seen enough?
She was often called out for being too sexy. Sexist even. Unrealistic. So, come the well-timed reboot of the series, giving her a much more realistic body. Basically as in, her boobs aren't bigger than her head anymore. And she was given emotions. Who would